Alumni Relations and Advancement Programming here at the college. And it is my pleasure to welcome you this afternoon to our webinar. And we are so happy to be in partnership with Father Iain and Mary Feenan Nelson and all of our colleagues at the Alva de Mars Megan Chapel Arts Center. Tonight, I think, is a very exciting program where we get to highlight some of our works in the permanent collection. Throughout the course of the year, we've tried to bring to our alumni, our community, our friends, programming that would be interesting, program that you might, pique your interest, spark your creativity, foster lifelong learning, and really try to keep you connected to the hilltop, your home away from home during these months of the pandemic. I think tonight we have a lovely presentation on some beautiful works of art and some very fine speakers who will walk us through the whole process of works on art and some of the works in our permanent collection. We do have a question and answer function. So if you have any questions through the program, be sure to submit them through the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. And now I will turn it over to my colleague, Sharon Sweet, who is Director of Corporate Relations at the college, who will welcome our presenters and moderate our webinar this evening. So thanks again for joining us, and thank you, Sharon, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you for that introduction, Father Bennett. This week, I had the pleasure of spending some time, albeit virtually, with our two presenters whose knowledge and passion for fine art is contagious. I think you'll soon discover that. Mary Feenan Nelson graduated from St. Anselm College in 2012 as an art history major. She began her career in project management at the Lexington Historical Society and Antiques and Fine Art magazine. In 2015, Mary joined the MFA Boston and worked in the curatorial department for European art for 3.5 years. In 2019, Mary joined the exhibitions department at the MFA as an assistant project manager. There she organizes, plans content, and installs objects for exhibition projects that are on view to more than 1 million annual visitors. Additionally, Mary is often enlisted to escort paintings that the museum lends to other institutions. Finally, Mary was recently recognized by St. Anselm College Alumni Association in the 10 Under 10 program that proudly celebrates and showcases the successes of young alumni who are already shaping the future. So congratulations, and we welcome you, Mary. Of course, any discussion about art in St. Anselm College would not be complete without Father Iain MacLellan. He has been the director of the Chapel Art Center for almost 20 years. He received a Master of Fine Arts degree with a concentration in painting from the Graduate School of Figurative Art, the New York Academy, in 1997. He taught basic and advanced drawing for many years at St. Anselm College, including a specialization in Renaissance drawing techniques and the human figure. His major focus, however, has been to expand the Chapel Art Center's presence on campus and in the region, its exhibitions and programs, and the college's permanent collection. We are so grateful, Father Iain and Mary, that you have agreed to spend an hour of your time with us. Perhaps as a way of leading into the program, you can tell us what inspired you to curate the Works on Paper exhibition, and how did you come up with the name Paper Palaces? I'll turn it over now.
Thank you very much, Sharon. It's nice to be here and to be with Mary, my good friend, and all of you, Patrice Russell, Father Bennett Phillips, Megan LaPointe, and you, Sharon. And we thought that Paper Palaces was a good title for this webinar because Works on Paper, which is the title of the show, can be misleading in a sense. A lot of people do not know that works on paper are a category unto themselves. They are works that are collected and kept in a special way because they are works on paper. But works on paper presents many possibilities. Paper allows for ideas to actually build, either by careful design and construction and layering. Also, there's a kind of mental rooms for imagination and experiment when you're talking about works on paper, which I think we will see. The dreams of the artist to tell a story or simply to represent a form or an idea or a symbol, and even just a simple abstract color arrangement really come to life pretty easily with paper for two reasons, I think. One being that the paper is available, accessible, kind of useful, handy. And secondly, I think because it is, well, I just think very useful. Over the centuries, paper has become very useful. And in one sense, it's dispensable. In another sense, it's precious. So all these possibilities really, besides the alliteration, having been an English major, I think I love alliteration. Paper palaces we thought would be inspiring. And I worked also with our graphic designer, Annie Giard, in our communications and marketing department to come up with a good title when we were thinking about this. So that's kind of the best description I can come up with. And then, of course, Mary and I have met several times. Mary came to campus and we went through the gallery together alone, and it was really a blast. It was such a great time. Mary was our intern years ago before she graduated, and she moved into the art field so beautifully. And now she is here, and she walked through the room, and I was really convinced that this notion of paper palaces was a good thing, because I could see it really building lots of room for her own imagination and enjoyment. And she was reminiscing and looking forward and seeing new things and looking back. And so it just builds on itself.
Well said. Thank you, Father Iain, and thank you, Sharon, for the introduction. I'm happy to be here, and I have to say I was so happy last month to be able to go back into the Chapel Art Center and visit old friends and see some new friends that we'll see in the slideshow. But I do want to say the Chapel Art Center just has been a part of my life since I believe I was 12 or 13 years old. So it's been part of my life for over half my life. So every visit, whether it's to see an exhibition or just to be in the gallery itself with nothing on the wall, to pay a visit to Father Iain in the office, it feels like home and a palace. So it's paper palaces within one gorgeous palace that has been that way for me for a long time.
Thank you, Mary. It's, as I said, Mary's an old friend, and not an old friend, a young friend, a longtime friend. I've been friends with her family. I remember when Mary was born, and it's really thrilling. And I really appreciate the alumni office offering this opportunity, not simply for our alumni, but for us as well, to have to sort of pull things together to make a presentation and then to be able to share it. We're sorry that people can't visit here. We really are. And this is giving us an opportunity to show the works. So do we get started? I'll tell you from the outset, we're going to be looking at drawings, watercolors and gouaches, pastels, prints, serigraphs, lithographs, etchings, engravings, one cliché vert, which we'll explain, and collages. So that's basically the categories we'll be looking at. And we can start with those first slides. They're paired up so that we can get to see as many as possible. The first slides you'll see just give you a sense of the gallery itself and what it looks like. This is our signature wall, we call it, where you will have the wall text, which explains what our motivations were in curating works on paper. You'll see it includes recent acquisitions as well, and they're all selections from the permanent collection. Next slide. This gives you a fuller sense of the room with, of course, the Agnus Dei ceiling, which is so renowned, so beautiful. Father Raphael did back in, finished in 1930. But it gives you a sense of the color and design of the room and what it is we were trying to set for, let's say, a tone. The notion of jewel tones, the notion of a soft spring feeling, but also I think a sense of the kind of body of work with flesh tones and something very, very subtle that allows these works on paper to really stand out. So there's a lot to think about, but I think it's helpful for you to see the space and some selections from our furniture collection and a small mask from our sculpture collection you can see in the mid space with the table. So that's a bronze.
And if I might say, when I visited, there were several work study students in the gallery during my visit. And they had said, and it reminded me of my internship at the Chapel Art Center, some of them were involved in the color selection in the gallery. And I think that process through work study or an internship at the Chapel Art Center is so formative, or it was for me, to be able to work with you, Father Iain, to look at the works, study the works, be able to identify together collaboratively what is going to make the gallery pop with the exhibition. And you can tell that the students really enjoy doing that. And I certainly did when I was there.
Yes, it is. I was amazed at the students. What surprises me is again and again, are the students who are not majoring in the fine arts and really have had only kind of a surface experience with the fine arts, but the intelligence that students have really relate to this instance over and again. They're organized, they're cautious, they're considerate, but their visual abilities are really amazing, which proves to me again and again that in the liberal arts setting, students are really exercising so many abilities and so many talents simultaneously. So this can really be called experiential learning. The foreground color, that dark blue wall, was chosen by a freshman nursing student who just started at the Chapel Art Center.
Right.
She was so analytical about the work that was going to be placed. There was a color there already, which we knew was wrong. And she came to the color swatches with me on the table, and it's a study table of sorts, and she chose that color. She liked how it brought the shadows out. She was really very astute. It's a natural ability, but I think, as I said, intelligence relates to intelligence. She's a nursing major. We go to the next slide. I think that we can probably move this, just another visual for you to see how the works are laid out and how works are set up to relate to each other. Next slide. And just another view, another color scheme. Next slide. And then the next slide. So here are our first selections. These first two drawings on the left, the French School it's called. We don't know the author of the work. And on the right, it's by Edward Fechner, that 19th century, both of them. The recent acquisitions, which I encountered a year apart from the same dealer, both of them appealing additions, new additions to our figurative collection. We might consider them to be old masters, but they're just 19th century, so not that long ago. As drawings, they're very similar, but they differ greatly in their technique. The French School pastel to the left is a tonal drawing, but with just a few lines to build the neck and the shoulders for the head of the boy. And the head of the young boy wearing a fur hat on the right is completely linear with crosshatcher only. So these are great teaching tools besides being very aesthetically pleasing. And they are, in one sense, kind of two ways of drawing. And that's probably the most instructive thing about them. On the left, all tonal, no real lines in there at all. And on the right, no smudging, no tonalness. It's just no tonality, I should say. It's all just linear, crosshatcher. So it makes them really a very good instruction, but also very endearing to the collection because they're young boys and because they have sweet faces and because they're very tactile in a way too.
Yes, and as I said earlier in the webinar, being able to see new acquisitions in person. I mean, Father Ian and I have communicated personally about what he's interested in and what he's acquiring, but just being able to see the works installed on the walls is really something. Of course, the signature image of the boy with the blue hat really knocks you off your feet when you come in, especially with that color that the nursing major chose behind it. And then when the boy with the fur hat is around the corner of the first wall section on the right when you enter, and it just is a delightful, the way that it's matted, you can see a little bit of the blue mat here in this image, and just really getting up close and seeing the detail in the etching is remarkable. And also, I think these two spoke to me because it transported me back to my time as a student, as I often am when I visit the Chapel Art Center, but specifically to your Renaissance Techniques class, Father Ian. Just these two works are examples of key lessons that I learned under your study.
Yeah.
And the smudging of the boy with the blue hat reminds me of a moment where I was working on a figural drawing and you came behind me and smudged the work and said it needs more tone. And I got a little upset, but I realized that it was important to learn how to pull out light, how to add darkness to create something very atmospheric and tonal. So
the importance of learning to describe form, these really teach anyone that to describe form either tonally or with line. And it's a good teaching tool, but a great lesson too in how the development of drawing techniques relates as far back as the Renaissance. Leonardo, we know, talked about sfumato, which means smoky, and he was famous for making great atmospheric drawings by really blending things into a very tonal atmosphere. And then, of course, an old master like Dürer from the German world, some form delineating lines. He's very well known for that crosshatcher that really grasps a form by just cross-hatched lines that when they're open, let in more light, and when they're closed, let in less light. Next slides. Two figural works again, male and female. This pairing by Michael Burt on the left and Bruce Samuelson on the right takes these same techniques to a new level, this notion of linear and tonal. On the left, Michael Burt works very linearly. These are strong, linear techniques where both interior and exterior. So he's working almost exclusively with line, and his techniques, on the Archer on the left is colored pencil and gouache on toned paper. We could go into that, but once again, it's crosshatcher that makes that form. And on the right side, Bruce Samuelson is working with pastels and with charcoal, with line and tone. So they're just really good examples of how human form is expressed through these different kinds of techniques. Both of the papers are toned by hand. Michael Burt uses, I think it's a gesso-based tone. He colors the paper first so that the figure can really be standing out against the tone behind the figure. But if we could see them a little more closely, you could see just how carefully Michael Burt uses the crosshatcher lines. It's really drawing techniques, but he's using, of course, kind of a painterly substance as well. On the right side, the Bruce Samuelson is really beautifully executed, almost like Michelangelo, with a whole variety of tones with the pastels and the chalk.
And I think what these works do for a student, an art history student, or maybe a student who's taking art history or studio as an elective, just to see examples like this in the gallery while you're learning about the great draftsmen in history, while you're learning about how to draw yourself, being able to come up into the space and see the lessons learned right in front of you and be inspired and make those connections between, you know, doing the art yourself and learning from a textbook, learning from slides. It's really something special, something I valued, and I'm sure students that see the collection now also do.
True, it's very instructional in the sense that, you know, that both of these drawings could be preparations for eventual paintings. We really don't know. But in each case, we can see from these singular figures, the storytelling. The archer on the left obviously has more than one figure, but the prominent archer is really talking about that heroic figure in preparation maybe for something, as I say, larger, but there's a story and a narrative in each of these where the artist, through the expression of technique, is able to convey the strength in both cases, also the liveliness in both cases, activity. I think the figure on the right has just a beautiful emotion to it, and kind of like the figure is being recreated in the motion of the lines. There's a sense of struggle and suffering maybe, but there's also a sense of kind of a glorious recreation of the figure. So there's a narrative sense that comes through in storytelling with the techniques themselves of line and tone. It creates atmosphere and mystery in one sense. And at the same time, these lines really give a really well-defined sense of motion and of definitive space. Next slides. Just one in this case. This is, we hold this kind of singularly. It relates very nicely to what we've seen already. It's a portrait, it's a human figure, but this work by Robert Bauer is tempera on paper. So that's egg tempera, yet another technique. I think it's obvious to see the kind of subtleties the artist is able to achieve through this medium. Egg tempera means you take the yellow part of the egg and you mix it with pigments, and it becomes, it's like a water medium. You can use water, and he's prepared this paper with kind of a gesso background, and then working on top of that, almost like it's a panel, a prepared panel. But the paper gives him, you know, kind of the room for experiment. You can almost see his structure lines being left, like in the nape of her neck, or just about at her cheek level, where he's really carefully constructing this head in perspective. And then he's able to achieve such subtleties through this egg tempera medium, the gray transitional tones in near the orbital sphere, near the eyes. Cooler areas mean it's a bony kind of a section. Warmer areas mean it's kind of a fleshy kind of an area in the face, in all parts of the body. So, and then a tremendously, you know, illumination factor that's happening here really gives a sense of a sort of a heavenly body almost. And it's, the hair strands are beautifully done, very fine brushes with egg tempera, and just an exquisite execution we thought should be in its own, and being such a different kind of a medium, not familiar to a lot of people.
Yes, and I have to say, I don't know what I like better, seeing old friends or meeting new friends at the gallery. And this is one of my favorites when it's on view. I just am in front of it for a really long time because as an art history student, I think egg tempera takes you back to medieval paintings, and you see lots of virgin and child images where the tempera, the process has faded, and so the skin coloration's a little different. And so to see the medium egg tempera on the label and to see something so vibrant and contemporary is really something else. And Father Ian, I don't know if I ever asked you how you brought this into the collection.
There was an exhibit at Forum Gallery in New York many years ago, before 2010. And I received a catalog. I have a good relationship with them, always did, from my days in New York. And they are a gallery that specializes in a good range of contemporary works, but they are very focused and always have been on what we call representation. So I think in the common language of people, we call it realist now, which is kind of a misnomer for it's representational art that is, we might call traditional. So Robert Bauer exhibited there, and he had a whole series of these kinds of portraits We have two. We have a male called Adam, and we have this figure called Erica. So that's how I discovered, and we had an exhibit for Robert Bauer here. And naturally, when you have an exhibit, sometimes it allows you to really see how the work can fit into the collection. But we do have a focus here on the human figure. And this one, being a contemporary drawing, relates very nicely to the old master drawings that we have in prints.
Thank you.
Next slide. Here are two whistlers. Now we're moving into prints. So these are both prints. The one on the left is called Limehouse, and that is a lithotint. And on the right is The Dancing Girl, and that is a lithograph on paper. Lithographs, as I said before, are pretty complicated, but a lithograph is made basically on a stone, litho being stone, right? The Paleolithic age, the Stone Age. So the stone is prepared, it could be limestone, and it's a very flat, even surface and hard surface. And it absorbs very nicely as the artist prepares the stone for the transfer of the image to a piece of paper. The one on the left, the lithotint, the stone is prepared with kind of an aqueous substance, which the artist then pulls from and creates the light. On the right, it's the greasy crayon, the traditional lithograph, that the artist draws onto the stone and then prepares that drawing drawn on the stone chemically for transfer to paper. What's interesting about these are the James Abbott McNeill Whistler, one of the most famous artists of all time. The first place I studied art was his birthplace in Lowell, Massachusetts. And he's kind of an expatriate American. He really got tied to England, but he was American. And these are both clearly representative of what a modernist he was. He used to say that he thought that paintings should look like breath on glass. And in both of these instances, you see that kind of mysterious transparency that he loved. In his famous Nocturnes, for instance, which are color portraits of paintings of harbor scenes. These are good examples of what Whistler really was to the world, a true modernist who took the very traditions of art history from the old masters, well-trained in Paris, and he was transforming that into a whole new mode of expression. You can see in both instances his butterfly signature, which means that these prints were made in his lifetime and that he approved of them. There were posthumous prints made of the Dancing Girl, for instance, which are very dark and highly contrasted, which he didn't like. He wanted this diaphanous feeling of the figure in a drapery and enhancing the kind of, once again, mystery of the presence of the figure, where there's a solidity and a human form, but also a transparency which alludes to many things. Mary, what do you think?
I think that these are beautiful works, and I wrote my senior thesis at the college about Henri Toulouse-Lautrec, who we'll see. He's not in this presentation, but appears later in the 19th century. But I think as you learn about lithographs and that process, it seems very intimidating, but there's obviously a lot of benefits to learning. Mass production industry is a good way for artists to get their works out there. And we're kind of going to see how the prints transform throughout the century, and artists doing the same thing, but slightly differently. But these works are great. And Whistler is obviously, it's a household name for art historians, I think others as well. It's just, these are delightful works to experience.
Yeah, they're really lovely. We were very fortunate to be able to get, especially the one on the left, the cliché vert. Not the cliché vert, that's not the cliché, that's the lithotint that was available for years, and I saw it at the dealers many times from year to year at different fairs. And then I went to see him when he was kind of retiring, and it was offered to us at a greatly reduced price, and we nabbed it. I sort of blew my wad on a weekend on one Whistler, but it was kind of fun
Worth
walking
it.
around New York telling people I wasn't buying anything because I bought a Whistler.
That sounds like it's worth it to me.
For those who are listening, I mean, Whistler's Mother is one of the most famous paintings in the world. It used to be, for us baby boomers, it was a part of the canon of learning. You saw Whistler's Mother in all kinds of books. Young people don't know Whistler's Mother that well anymore, or even Whistler for that matter, but he's certainly a renowned figure in the 19th century art world. Next slide. So we have said pretty much all we can say about, at least in the moment, this litho tint. But this gave us a closer look at the litho tint, and Mary and I thought it was important to give us an ability to focus on it without it being paired with anything else. I think folks can see the kind of, hand-drawn look of it. Even though it's a lithograph, it looks like a charcoal. And one can also see in a closer look how very simple it is, that there's such a great knowledge invested in the simple form. Whistler was so skilled and so knowledgeable that he could really, and most real masters know how simple things have to be in order to execute a strong reality. But this gives people an easy look at close up. Also, one can see now Whistler's hand signature to the lower right, just below his butterfly signature in the lower right of the print itself. Next slide. This is the cliché vert I think you heard me refer to. This is Jean-Baptiste Camilcaro, one of the most famous impressionists in the French world, known all over the world. Not to give the impression that this is anything extremely expensive or rare. This would be available, but prints were available, and this one became available from the same dealer. And I just thought it was such a charming, charming figure. It's called The Artist in Italy, and actually in French, L'artiste en Italie. And this cliché vert is made like a photograph is made in a sense, but there was a sort of sticky substance applied to a piece of glass, and then the artist draws through the sticky substance into the glass, and then those lines are exposed and then placed on photosensitive paper and let the light shine through the lines, and it makes the impression on the paper. So it's really like a photographic process, and prints really have just innumerable techniques. And this is one of them. It makes for a very charming drawing.
Very charming. It definitely commands a lot of attention when you see it in the gallery. There's so much energy being emitted from the work. And it's just, I think, what you don't see in the Whistler is really, it looks almost like a freehand drawing, hardly picking up a pencil. Of course, not a pencil, but there's something so charming about that as well.
Next slide. Another famous French artist, Henri Matisse. This is a lithograph as well. It's pretty simple to see how it is. This gets drawn with a crayon and onto a stone and gets treated so that it can be printable. Matisse loved these lithographs. He loved to draw spontaneously with the model. This is from a collection of his lithographs called Themes and Variations. And we have 3 of them. This is just one of the 3. I think there may be 12 in the series. And this one we just love because it does kind of capture the spontaneity of drawing and this idea that comes inherently with the modernism of Matisse and artists of that era, and the kind of innovation that when art was, so celebrated in the late 19th and early 20th century. So it's just a charming signature work of Matisse's form and his fluidness and his ability to make a charming drawing and to almost decorate it with such spontaneity. And then the kind of really efficiency where he is make a composition so intricate and so kind of complete in a very small space. Once again, making great with something very small. That's what drawings can do.
Definitely. And just to point out, I mean, the last set of works that we've looked at are high caliber artists, and it's so great to have this level artists from the canon represented, you know, with New England artists, with artists that are lesser known gems that relate to these major artists, seeing this work in relation to everything else in the exhibition and the Whistler and the Curate is just, it's delightful. And it's something that I have always liked about the Chapel Art Center. Big names mixed with some names that we need to learn. And that's really great. And I think I wanted to bring up, as we go into the next slide, I did have a quote down, I'm paraphrasing. Whistler had said, industry of art is necessity. Printmaking is something that needs to happen. It's not a virtue. And any evidence of industry is a blemish. And as so we go from the super traditional representations into more modern, like Matisse and the next slide that we'll show you, just seeing how the approach to printmaking changes over the century is, thank you for the next slide, is really, it's just so transformative to watch in the gallery. You go from the front of the gallery to the back, and you see how printmaking truly does take shape over 100 years. And if you can go see it before the show closes, I would recommend.
These are colored lithographs. So you can see the movement from something extremely simple, like the Matisse or like the Whistler Dancing Girl, into something much more sophisticated in a way, sophisticated in terms of technical process. We could spend really a week going over how this is done. But on the left is Hans Erni. It's been in the collection for many years. I don't know who bought it, but I was looking at a Hans Erni myself without knowing this was in the collection. Before the collection was reorganized, it was very hard to tell what was in there. And that's a process, of course, and I was fairly new in the gallery. But to discover this very large, multicolored, I think we call that like 3-color or 4-color lithograph was very exciting. One can see the influence here of the Picasso era and modernism and abstraction. This is a Perrault or a Harlequin, Laucan it's called in French. And on the right, the first page in a series of color lithographs that Edouard Reichert did for a publication called Couverture de l'Album. Passages and Interiors is where you can see it written, and you can see it written in French lithographies, colors that were really, they're very, very, very vibrant as you go through. This is one in a series. This is the title page. There's a whole series that goes with this. Hopefully we'll be able to collect the whole series. This one is not one of the most expensive ones, but certainly one of the most interesting ones. This at-home scene of figures, a man and a woman sitting across from each other, and with a cat sitting next to the woman. It's just a very nice at-home scene. And naturally, a name like Vuillard is huge. We went down to Smith College and visited with them, and they were so kind. They looked up our collection and they pulled out, they have the entire series, of course. So they were very, very complimentary about our ability to obtain something like this. And Hans Erni on the left is Swiss, but there's really a great French influence there. And on the right, of course, the quintessential French idea in the late 19th, early 20th century.
Right. The Vuillard is reminiscent of a series that I wrote about. I did mention Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec earlier. He was one of the great lithographers of the Belle Époque, the end of the 19th century. He did a series L, which is a series of women from brothels at home, getting ready, doing normal things, not performing, not doing anything that they would do in the Moulin Rouge. And I can definitely see some connections. If anyone wants to look it up, it's Toulouse-Lautrec, L, the word for women in French. And again, just about what I was mentioning with Whistler, you can, in these more modern prints, you can definitely see, they want you to see the process. They want you to see smudges in these works, especially at the bottom of the Vuillard. You can see some sort of workmanship at the very bottom of the stone, like a smudging, maybe a cloth wiping something. They want that messy, gritty artist the messy, gritty techniques to come through, rather than being a picture perfect. It's just seeing that transformation over the century is something.
It's very true. I think I'm forgetting now what I was going to say. You inspired me to say something else about these lithographs, but we can see the progression here into what Mary points out to be the artist not hiding anymore, not really trying to follow form, but that is a practice form, certainly form of the figure or form of things, but really getting into more expression.
Yes.
Next slide. So here, two very kind of postmodern works, not kind of postmodern, they're absolutely postmodern. On the left, William Holst, American, died in 1995. So the late 20th century, that is a lithograph on the left, and on the right, Ben Shahn, and that is a serigraph, which is a screen print. We have two Ben Shahns that were gifted to us, and Ben Shahn is a very strong figure in the art world. Any of these names we are mentioning can be Googled, of course, and we can provide people with a list of works if they wanted them. They were interested in any one of these things. But the William Holst on the left was a gift recently, also from a man who was interested in New York City about William Holst showing here in 1986. William Holst was part of a group exhibition called The Artist and the Object. And we were pleased to try to research for this gentleman. And as I researched, he became very pleased with us and consulted with someone in a gallery in Paris and found this print and had me choose one and sent it to us. So the abstraction is obvious, but I think that there is a great sense of presence in both of them. We liked them together. They're hanging together in the gallery side by side or in adjacent walls. And I love the figure of the man on the right. Looks like he is praying. But that is called, on the left is Interior 3 is on the left. That's the William Holst. And on the right, I don't have a title for that. It's funny. I think it's called, not meditation, but something like, well, dreaming or meditation, or it's something more compelling than that. I'm sorry, I don't have that title. But I think we've moved now through a progression, seeing the progression from, clearly classical, traditional representational works to things that are modern and postmodern, from representation to abstraction, poetry that comes with the freedom as the art world changes from 1900 to 2000. Next slide. We have on the left, I'm sorry, folks. Somehow my video keeps going out, so I'll just keep bringing it back. On the left, we have an etching by Robert Emmett Grady, American, and it's a portrait of a young woman. It's the artist's proof. You can see it's noted on the bottom of the print. And on the right, we have a color lithograph by Fairfield Porter, one of certainly the most well-known American artists from the 20th century. I really find that charming. They're hanging side by side in the gallery. And as we look at the Porter and the Grady, we jump from print to print very readily. The color lithograph, there seems to be a great relationship between the techniques and the meaning of the print. And the Grady has an energetic line in it with some real depth and motion in the layering, much like the drawing we saw of the nude figure earlier. That looks so much like Michelangelo. These lines really create the energy. And in this sense, there's a strange kind of layering and atmosphere in the etching on the left, as there is in the kind of depth perception in the Porter on the right. The Porter on the right is a color lithograph like some we've seen already, but with tremendous color, tremendous technical ability. He worked with a printer to create this beautiful patterning and a beautiful kind of comment on the interior in a typical New England home. And I can see really the figure sitting in that room somewhere expressing the kind of modern energy and attitude and kind of confrontation against tradition, which Porter is expressing on the right.
That's a great relationship. And did I just dream this up, or did you tell me that she was really reluctant to pose for this work?
Hard to say. I just remember hearing that somewhere. And
Okay.
I think that the pose, it's not a traditional portrait pose. It's something that's very spontaneous. How an artist would capture something like that, I think, is tremendously interesting.
Yes.
Whether he took a photograph in this, 1947 era, or if he just remembered her, was able to draw her in from memory. But I think I just like the relationship between the two, and also this notion of the creative spirit in the lines that he's using. It's like the Samuelson that we looked at earlier, the nude figure that was, really turning on the page. Here, this figure is turning as well. You can see some of those seemingly, meaningless lines behind her, but you can see how they also create a sense of her interior kind of motion and attitude, and really, and also, and brings her figure to the center of the page. So again, this testament to how much can happen on a simple piece of paper.
Exactly. And another plug to studying at St. Anselm College, but Fairfield Porter, Kim Asbury taught a painting class. I know we're talking about prints, but what you just said about color and his real bold use of color. When I took a class with Kim Asbury, I was so terrified of using color because I am comfortable in black and white, probably because of your class, Father Iain. And then she had us look at Fairfield Porter and his color blocking techniques, and how not really necessarily about perfect form. It's about identifying where those colors are happiest. And I just think back to those lessons and really am thankful to Fairfield Porter for his techniques.
Yeah, he is a marvel. And once again, this notion of mastery and how the mastery really underlies the execution. They are free because they know so well what is required to make something work. I think it's interesting on the right-hand side, the Porter print, the little rocking chair, which is like a shaker rocker, and how kind of seemingly misdrawn it is, but he is able to put that in perspective and to make that shape so interesting and to make it sort of a premier form in the entrance into that room that leads your eye through to the back of the room with the old-fashioned tall lamp with the globes and then the fireplace with the mantle and the pictures on the wall. It's just incredible that he would know so much about perspective, but to make a flat print as he did. I think the color of the foreground square, which is either a bench or a radiator or something in the entranceway, maybe it's a bench, but it's really quite fascinating what great color there is and how much it takes in a lithograph, a color lithograph, to make that color work. The layering is so careful.
Beautiful.
Next slide. These are very two gouaches. I'm going to look at Sandy, which is Sandy. No, that's not. This is, oh, this is Elizabeth Withington on the left. And it's Bernard Lamotte, a Frenchman, on the right. And we love these street scenes. We'll see others. They just are something we started to collect. These became available, and when you see how many street scenes can really create a sense of depth, a sense of city dwelling, a sense, again, of narrative, of a great story, these figures getting isolated, but also within the context of a busy street, the buildings, the architecture, of course, the sense of foreign places are really wonderful. So it's very educative in the sense that it really brings you to a new place, gives you a sense of a different culture, but also gives you a great sense of where form and color and design originate and what kind of variety there is out there. These are not large works, but they're very small works, but as powerful. And the execution, again, in a modern sense, of the figures that are drawn very carefully but efficiently. That little girl leaning against the wall near the old woman on the left-hand side is just about as sweet and endearing as anything could be.
And these are both gouache.
They're both gouache.
Correct.
I think Father Bennett mentioned earlier that he liked the gouaches. And for the folks out there who don't know what gouache is, watercolors are transparent. So transparency turns to opaque when you add a white pigment to the watercolor. It turns it into a milky, opaque substance. Most clear in the Elizabeth Withington to the left with that yellow light area, which represents the sun shining in the street. It's interesting too to note that in the Withington on the left, that gray area in the shadow is really just the paper. She skims over it with some light gouache to create a variation in the tonality, to create kind of a reflected light coming off the buildings, but the paper itself becomes the medium. It represents the shadow. On the right-hand side, the artist is covering everything with a gouache. I think maybe in the building, the retreating building on the right, there's some of the paper is showing through. It could be a gray paper, but I've never been able to detect whether or not the paper is really showing through in that instance. But on the left-hand side, the paper becomes the medium, and we'll see that in some watercolors.
And
So,
oh, sorry.
no, that's okay. Gouache is a water medium. It's a watercolor medium, but it's not transparent, it's opaque.
They're beautiful. And I hope I don't actually have the accession date for the Withington, but I believe that's one of the first works I encountered when visiting the Chapel Arts Center when I was quite young. It's just gorgeous. And of course, the primary colors of yellow, red, and blue at the center of that composition just are gorgeous.
They are. And then I think we're getting close to our selection. There's one more slide. There are many slides which we can go to, but the next one really takes us through kind of a little archway of a variety of mediums. This one is Albert Ballou on the left, and no, I didn't know that these were paired here. This is I want to make sure we've got, this is Susan Reicher Knox on the right, which we had in the gallery for a long time. That is a woodcut. And the Sandy Wadlington is a woodblock print on the left. There isn't much of a difference except that on the left, it's an extremely complicated process, but a woodblock print or a woodcut means that you're working in a relief print. It's not an intaglio print. Intaglio means you incise a certain, plate and the ink moves into the incisions. In this case, they cut the wood out so there's a block shape. And the block shape that is a relief that it rises from the block becomes the place that takes the ink or the color to make the wood block print on the left or the woodcut on the right. Susan Reicher Knox, a very well-known, prominent, progressive female artist from the last century. And Sandy Wadlington on the left does beautiful work, and she's a contemporary artist. She's a painter and a printmaker.
I think the Wadlington work is surprising. I know, myself included, I think that when a lot of people hear wood block print or wood block, they generally tend to think of works more like the Knox, where you can really see
Right.
the gritty lines, the gritty carving. So the Wadlington is surprising. Just the real fine detail with that one is lovely.
So that is kind of a sort of foreground selection that we've made. There are other slides. I don't think we have time to go through those, but I think we chose these works that are a bit more complicated. As we go through the next slides, we'll just see a few other things from the gallery. This is Philip Sage, and that's Mardi Gras Indians. That's a color etching. Next slide. We have a Peter Milton on the left. That's called Jolly Corner from 1971, and that's an etching and engraving. The etching is the foreground. It's a bunny cat. He's a very interesting guy, very interesting process. And then the engraving, I think, is the background area, the very fine lines. On the right is Anne Connell, who showed here a few years ago. That is gouache, collage, silver point on paper, mounted on panel. Next slide. Collages. On the right, Phoebe Beasley, Sunrise is Coming After a While. These are lovely collages in the form of serigraph prints, that's silkscreen prints made for a book, an illustrated book of poetry. And above that, next to that is James Palmigiano, a mixed media collage. Langston Hughes is the poet that Beasley made these collages to go with his poems. It's a new purchase that we made in a program called Beauty Bound, where books themselves are presented as art forms. Next slide. Another gouache by Karl Drerup, Germany, origins, he's from Germany, became an American, I believe, 20th century gouache on paper. Just a delightful, transparent, lighthearted preparation he was making for an enamel piece. But the gouache itself really was so true to the medium, we just purchased it. And it's just, it's a great European look to it. Next slide. A watercolor by Charles Reed, Docks and Belize, late 20th century, early 21st century. It's a watercolor on paper. So we have a few watercolors to come. Next slide. Albert Ballou on the left, 19th century watercolor, another alleyway, street scene. On the right, John Wharf, American, Winter Birches, watercolor on paper. Next slide. On the left side is Paul-Émile Collin, French, and that is gouache and metallic ink on a very thick, heavy black paper. This, you can see the black paper showing through. And on the right side, Betty Lou Schlemm, American, still living, born in 1934, late 20th century, watercolor. Very much like, Winslow Homer or John Singer Sargent or Andrew Wyeth. Next slide.
Well, and so here, I know we're almost at time. I did include a few images from the MFA's collection of works on paper that the paper, or the Works on Paper exhibition made me think of. So these two works are by Andrew Wyeth. The one on the left is Memorial Day. The one on the right is Mr. Rivers Garden. And so just seeing works like the Schlem, there's another work of a cemetery with an American flag as well, really made me think of these, and just how the works in the Works on Paper exhibition mirror the collecting styles of the Chapel Art Center, mirror the collecting styles of the MFA, which is pretty cool. Next slide. And of course, just to nod to how important watercolors are in this section, the work on the left is John Singer Sargent, and the title, I'm always bad with titles, The Shadowed Stream, was featured in an exhibition in 2013 on Sargent's watercolors, and it was very popular and well received. And the MFA has Works on Paper shows all the time, but and so it's natural that the Chapel Art Center would want to collect and display works on paper as well. And then this one on the right is Winslow Homer, very famous New England artist, which is reminiscent of, it just reminded me of the watercolor at the start of this section, which now I am misplacing the artist name, but it was I thought we would have more time, but we don't. So let's go to the next slide.
What was it? Oh, here's, this is another Charles Reed. This is a silkscreen print. Became very famous with Andy Warhol, where you have a silk screen and you have an image projected by taking a squeegee and running the squeegee over the silk screen, and it comes in layers and layers. Next slide. This is, I think we'll just focus on a couple more. This is an oil monotype print on paper by Carol Odell, a contemporary artist from Cape Cod. It's called Overcoming Obstacles. And once again, a layered process, different plates being used, and worked piece by piece, layer by layer. A monoprint means that this is the only one. This is if these prints are made one by one, they're not made in multiples. Next slide. Just a Lampkin, Catherine Lampkin, Janet Catherine Lampkin, acrylic on paper on the right, and on the left, Ben Frank Moss, acrylic on paper as well. Still Life color number 9, it's called. Next slide. Sandy Wadlington, she did the woodblock prints earlier. This is a Caran d'Ache, which is like a kind of like a crayon pencil. She layers beautifully, very realistic effects. Next slide. 2 pastels to finish off here. The one on the right is Bruce McCall, Spring Blooms, watercolor and pastel on paper, a gift from the artist. He showed here a few years ago. He is a Manchester artist, and he works at the Courier. He's really in Courier education. Does beautiful modernist floral things, also domestic scenes too. And on the left, Philip Brown Parsons, he would be 19th to 20th century. He's died in 1977, born in 1896. And these are called Seaside Weeds. So a pastel, just a pure pastel painting, we could call that. So that's the selection we have for today. We know it's running late, so we wanted to give people time to chime in or anyone to ask questions. It's a lot of works. That's 38 works we're looking at, so.
It's wonderful. And just when I went into the gallery about a little over a month ago, we asked ourselves before we really got into planning for this talk, why works on paper? And I think with this selection, you can really see why there's such a variety, and specifically these works on paper, the variety in techniques that we discussed, the variety of subject matter. There's diverse subject matter. You have women artists, male artists, artists from America, artists not from America. It's just a real treat to be able to go and see such a great display, a diverse display. I hope you found it.
Pleased to have Mary there to really get an objective viewpoint. because it's hard when you're working with these things and you know the work so well and you're putting them together, to have her come and to consult with me and kind of help plan this event really gave me some insights that I probably wouldn't have thought of.
Well, Father Iain and Mary, I just want to thank you for this wonderful presentation. It was informative, it was dynamic. I'm sure, like a lot of attendees at this webinar, I was up close to my screen trying to look at the details. So I think the only way to improve upon this experience would be to go to the Chapel Arts Center and actually view these prints. How long is the exhibition open and what is next?
The exhibition is open until May 6th, whatever that Saturday is. Let me see here. I'm going to
May
tell you
8th.
instantly. May 5th?
No,
May, it's open till that Friday, so it's open
Okay.
till
Right.
May 7th.
Great.
May 7th.
And what follows, Father Iain?
Next year, we're hoping really, and now touch with the pandemic and questions about what can be accomplished and who will be coming. But I think we're going to focus on another part of the permanent collection, the Mcdonald Collection, which is a sub-collection, of course, of the entire collection, works that are religious in nature. So the religious works and domestic scenes. The collection was named for a family from a donor, and that was the decision that was made many years ago. We showed the Mcdonald Collection in 2011, I think, or 2010, which was kind of the first time we really revealed the works, because we had enough to really have an exhibition. And we showed it in 2017 as well, in the fall. So we would like to have done it every 4 years. So, but we'd like to repeat some selections from the permanent collection so that students who are here for 4 years can see them. Make sure that we are able to show them. So it's been 17. So it'll be 4 years. 4 years since we last saw them.
Well, that's something we can all look forward to. And hopefully Mary Feenan Nelson will be back in a part of any webinar or tours that are given at the Chapel Arts Center. I think I just want to be sensitive to time and,
Yes.
and your time, your investment of time. So again, I just want to say thank you very much and hope people visit the Chapel Arts Center.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank you,
everyone for
Mary.
being here.
Thank you.